Good morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody, despite the challenges of travelling locally that I hear have been discussed this morning. A busy day, all sorts of things going on in the town hall, so I'm grateful for your attendance here this morning in the chamber. First of all, welcome to all members, members of the public, a member of the public, there we are, and also additional members. There we are, Beth over there, thank you. And do you want to introduce yourself? Sophia, there we are. I wanted to make sure that that was pronounced correct, because you hear Sophia, don't you, things like that, and two officers, so thank you for coming this morning. I'm not going to mention any more about the microphone, because you know how to use them by now. Are there any declaration of interests? No declaration of interest. And I always remind people that obviously that's your responsibility to declare those and everything. So, confirmation of minutes, you should have seen those for the 26th of March, that was the last meeting. So, would somebody like to propose that they are correct? Or yes, Councillor Settle, and any seconders for that? Councillor Nixon. All those in favour, correct record, please indicate. Unanimous, thank you very much. Thank you. Catherine, are there any substitute members?
Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Dixon and Councillor Viv Wilders here on his behalf, and I am aware that Councillor Evans is due to attend, but obviously having travelling difficulties.
Yes, which some of you will sympathise with, but I sometimes think it's a good idea just to come that little bit earlier than you feel comfortable with, just to give yourself that little bit of time. And of course, I think you received the advice, didn't you, in terms of potential parking problems. But have you all managed to park in the car park? No, did you go up to the North Promenade?
I got dropped off today.
Oh, you got dropped off, okay. Well, that's another way of dealing with it, okay. All right. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go on to decision items now, and in terms of protocol for everyone present, there are no speakers today, so we have a different protocol obviously when there are speakers, where we have a short introduction by the officer, the case officer, and then we move back to the speakers, and then we carry on with the presentation. And that's for a good reason, that then points picked up by the made by the speaker can sometimes be addressed by the officer in the presentation, etc. But we don't have any speakers, so it's fairly straightforward this morning. So first of all, can I just check that all of you are aware of, for both items, there are two items that we're looking at this morning. And there was a late observations report. Did you all receive that? If you've had time to look at it before, or would you like there isn't very much information, it's not particularly significant, but would you like any time, any members like time now to look at it? No, we're okay.
Be able to explain it
Yeah,
in the presentation.
yeah, okay. All right, just checking on that. And so we go to item 1. And it's quite a mouthful, this, when you look at the proposal. The erection of a 30 megawatt battery energy storage system facility, put my teeth back in now, consisting of 8 pairs of battery cell units, 8 battery inverter units, substation, switch room, auxiliary transformer, battery control room, 4 CCTV columns, a 2.4 metre security mesh fence, internal access roads, parking and turning area, attenuation pond, and associated hard and soft landscaping.
Was that the title of the presentation,
There we are. There we go. Exactly. I did warn you it was going to be somewhat elongated. Okay, but there's quite a lot of information in there, which is why I wanted to read it out. So we're going to go straight to Rob, who's the presenting officer this morning, who's done the report, etc. So, Rob, can I hand over to you, please?
Thank you, Chair. So yes, obviously agenda item 1 is, as Councillor described. I won't repeat it because it is quite a bit of a mouthful. The application site is edged red on the left-hand image. You can see it's just immediately north of West Moss Lane. The aerial image to the right just is provided so that members...
Stop you for a moment? I just want to check, because we have had problems in the past. Is that screen operational up there?
No, it's showing it's showing the room due to a source issue, but I've checked with the member of the public. She's happy with the presentation here.
Okay.
Obviously, she can move further forward.
That's
if
what I was
necessary.
going to say. If you did want to come a bit further forward, or even sit at the back there, so you get a better view, because you'll be much nearer the screen, and then you could see things. Okay. There we are. So if you sit on the back there, that's fine. All right. Thank you. Sorry, Rob.
Okay.
Carry on. Okay.
No problem. So the application site is just the red star. We have the settlement edge. Let me just put my cursor. We have the settlement edge of St Anne's here. This element of the residential area is known as Cypress Point. We have the new road over the Moss, which runs in that north-south direction. Fairhaven Golf Course, Lytham Hall here in its grounds. This road that runs in this route is Barlam Road to this junction, which then leads off in another direction along Peel Road. The site is within a countryside area designated by our local plan. So just for a bit of background, members might not be familiar with what a BESS facility is. So by way of background, the UK government has declared climate emergency and set statutory targets to cut greenhouse gas emissions. A significant large and small scale energy infrastructure will be required to meet that target. That includes energy which will be supplied by renewables such as solar and wind, but it also means the need for the creation of storage of that energy that is created. With regards to that storage, there is a commitment by the government to deliver 27 gigawatts of battery storage by 2030 through the Clean Power 2030 Action Plan. In addition, the National Grid has a statutory duty to ensure that the supply of electricity is maintained within the UK. So perhaps not necessarily in this area, but there's certainly areas of blackouts in parts of the country in peak demand. So BESS facilities are therefore seen to boost the supply of electricity and hopefully overcome those blackout issues which parts of the country suffer from. So BESS facilities, they basically operate in the most simplest way of drawing down electricity from the national grid at times of excess generation, so that excess generation relative largely to renewable energy such as solar and again wind farms. They store that energy in an off-grid location until such a time that demand dictates that it's needed, and when it is needed then it'll obviously be transferred from the battery storage area into the national grid system. Best there, they provide a certainty in times of a surge in electricity demand. So when demand is high, such as, I don't know, peak times outside, and when people are at home, tea time, those kind of times of the day. But it also shows that there's power reserves available to help avoid blackouts and obviously help National Grid meet their statutory duty for the supply of electricity. So just some photographs of the site as it stands at the moment. So the site is presently in agricultural use. You can see from the images on the right hand side that there aren't any structures at all on that site. It's a grass field. The boundaries of the site, so that the left hand image, that's taken from West Moss Lane looking in a northerly direction towards the application site, so you can see the presence of a mature hedgerow, but all other boundaries are formed by a post and wire fence, which you can see in the top and bottom images, save for a small group of trees positioned to the western boundary. So surrounding character, the left-hand image obviously depicts the application site in red. You can see from that that it forms part of a larger network of fields. They're similarly used for agricultural and equestrian purposes. There are groups of woodland in the area, as you can see to the west and to the east. And this blue line that shows the route of two bridleways that obviously continue in a north-south direction along Hallmoss Lane, I think it is, and then in a westerly direction along Westmoss Lane itself. This slide really is just intended to show members that it isn't an isolated site. There is development within the locality. So we have agricultural style stable buildings to the west. There is an employment site to the southwest. We have a pylon line which runs very close to the application site. There is this group of houses just positioned to the east on Westmoss Lane, and we have the Fox Brothers waste recycling facility just to the northeast, sorry. So the development itself, the application site is 1.5 hectares in size. It consists of a compound area which measures 70 metres in length by 41 metres in width. That's set back 25 metres from Westmoss Lane. There is 2 vehicle access points which will require the removal of approximately 40 metres of hedgerow. As Chair mentioned, there is a late obs which the description of development which is contained within the committee report inaccurately confirmed the amount of hedgerow removal to be 10 metres. That was based upon the original scheme. The scheme has been revised on guidance from the fire service to incorporate 2 entrances, which obviously has necessitated removal of additional hedgerow. In addition to that access revision, we have a revision that has removed an acoustic fence line from the perimeter of the compound. That was a 3 metre high acoustic fence.
Rob, I'm going to pause you because I need some advice here in terms of Martin coming in at this particular time. Yes, accepted, Martin. I just want to make sure that in terms of the balance of information that's been provided so far, would it be in order for Councillor Evans to actually take part or to listen, make comments but not vote? What's the situation? Because I'm just sort of wary that we have had some information actually imparted already.
Chairman, the position is that a member who hasn't heard the full presentation of information ought not to vote on the matter.
But could take part in the discussion and make comments but not vote?
Indeed.
That's what I thought the situation was. Okay. So if that's clear, Councillor Evans, you will be able to take part in the discussion but not actually vote at the end. Okay, thank you. We've got that.
Okay.
Okay, carry on.
Where was I? Yeah, so there's a secondary revision which has removed a 3 metre tall acoustic fence line. Officers tasked the applicant with looking into whether or not the acoustic fence line was actually necessary, and the reason for that was the visual concerns that the fence line would have. In response to that, it is detailed out in my presentation, but in response to that, the applicant confirmed that the acoustic fence that they originally provided wasn't actually necessary, and have replaced that fence line with a 2.4 mesh fence. That has obviously design benefits because it removes the solid hard face of a fence line with a mesh which allows views through, so you'll be able to see through the development of the fields that surround the site, for example. Landscaping wise, hedgerow is retained where feasible. It is only limited to a small portion to the south. The tree group to the northwest, that is similarly retained. We have significant amounts of new hedgerow planting, so all these green runs that you see around the perimeter of the application site and around the perimeter of the compound, that is all hedgerow planting. And where we don't see hedgerow planting, we have a group of trees to the southeast, and we have a mix of wildflower meadow and wet meadow planting as well. That wet meadow planting will take place within the proposed attenuation pond, which is positioned in this location to the north. The consent is sought for a temporary 40-year period. After that point, all above and below ground structures will be removed and the land reinstated to its present agricultural appearance. There are a number of structures associated to the BESS facility. I've detailed the main ones in my presentation. So we have 8 battery cabinets, which are these green coloured structures on the site plan. They are 2.8 metres in height, and we have some inverter units which are sited immediately adjacent to those battery cabinets, which are 2.3 metres in height. We've also got a control room, switchgear room, transformers, a substation and a water tank. The substation and water tank are just positioned beyond the compound of the BESS facility. The substation is probably, well, it is the larger of the structures which is proposed. That's 5.3 metres in height, but it has been designed to reflect the appearance of a garage, so it's got a dual pitched roof and is of brick construction. The approved point of connection with the national grid, that is positioned to the south in the substation, which is positioned just north of Cypress Point. So the cable route is proposed to follow West Moss Lane and then Hull Moss Lane in a southerly direction before connecting into the substation here. So that's just an aerial image of what the substation looks like. The applicant has also confirmed that that cable corridor that will be provided by the statutory undertake, which is Electricity North West in this circumstance, and that will be done using Electricity North West permitted development rights. So moving on to the assessment, obviously the main starting point is a principle of development. We're in a countryside location, so policy GD4 is of relevance. GD4D in particular, that refers to development essentially needed for the continuation of an existing enterprise of a type and scale which would not harm the surrounding character of the surrounding countryside. I think the starting point really for this assessment particularly is another BESS application which was initially refused by this planning committee, I think back in 2018. That was subsequently appealed, and through the inspector's deliberations, the inspector determined that the facility, so the facility to store electricity in connection with the national grid was essentially needed for the continuation of that existing facility, with that existing facility seen to be, the national grid. That appeal decision is key really in the assessment of the principle of development, because it establishes that a BESS facility is in accordance with GD4D, since it's essentially needed for the continuation of the national grid. On that basis alone, as officers, we consider that the development is compliant with countryside policy. Notwithstanding that though, we also have policy INF1, which seeks to deliver essential infrastructure, and that's to ensure that the housing and employment land targets within the local plan can be delivered. So there's enough electricity, for example, to make sure that the housing and employment land targets can actually be realised. So the continued supply and security of electricity by the national grid will assist these targets, adding further weight obviously to the essential need criteria of GD4D. Another matter that feeds into the principal assessment is loss of agricultural land. The submission confirms they provided an agricultural land classification report, and that confirmed that the development will result in the loss of 53% of grade 3A agricultural land. That's good quality and is seen to be best and most versatile agricultural land. Flip side to that, the loss is small in comparison to the amount of best and versatile agricultural land we have in the borough, but as I mentioned earlier, the consent is temporary. The land will be reinstated back to agricultural land. So in theory, yes, it's lost, but it's only lost temporarily until the expiration of the 40 years. And then at that point, the agricultural land will be reinstated. The applicant and myself in my committee report have given consideration to alternative site availability within the settlement, but it's considered that there aren't such sites available within the proximity of the approved connection point. When I looked into the alternative site availability, it was clear that the majority of site or potential sites within the settlement are within the residential areas. So obviously there are potential conflicts between a best facility and our neighbours that may live within that settlement area. Moving on to landscape and visual impact. So part of policy GD4D criteria is an assessment with regards to how it will impact on the countryside. In addition to that, we have policy in V1, which requires development of regard to its visual impact within its landscape context and type. The existing character of the site and surrounds is formed by undulating farmland, but it is punctured by built farm. It isn't isolated. There are man-made structures within vicinity, close proximity of the application site, such as housing, such as employment buildings, the pylon line, for example. Notwithstanding, obviously, the site is presently in agricultural use, so the proposal will certainly have an impact on how that appearance is presently perceived. That is only to a portion of the site, though, where the best facility itself will be positioned. So the land to the north obviously is going to be maintained as open, where the attenuation pond will be. That will obviously result in encroachment into the countryside, and that certainly will impact upon landscape character to a certain extent. In addition to that, because of that landscape character harm, there's also going to be some visual amenity harm where it's visible from West Moss Lane. There's bridleways within the vicinity, and there are houses which have either windows within the sides of the properties and exposed garden areas, which obviously where the best facility could obviously be seen from. In the flip side to that, we also see that the development, so the structures themselves are quite low level. We've removed the acoustic fence line, so as officers we've sought to try and improve the visual appearance of the development, and that is seen to certainly reduce and diminish the harm to the countryside and visual amenity that the development would have. In addition to that, we have the proposed landscaping, and that's going to ensure that the proposal won't have an unacceptably harmful impact on landscape character or visual amenity once mature. In addition, obviously, as we've already mentioned, the development is temporary for a 40-year period, so it's seen that after that period, the harm that is reported at the moment, that will be removed through the decommissioning process of the facility. Highways, we have policy GD7, which states should not prejudice highway or pedestrian safety or the efficient and convenient movement of all highway users. As a part of the application process, the fire service have been consulted on the development. They are supportive of the revised access arrangements, indeed have been insistent of the 2 access points. And the reason for that is in case of obstruction potentially one of those access points, say for smoke or for any other reason, there is an alternative access point into the site so that obviously the service can deal with the fire. The applicant has submitted a construction traffic management plan that confirms the time frame of construction to be 6 months, that the largest vehicle would be an articulated HGV, but there won't be any abnormal loads expected. Vehicles are going to be routed along West Moss Lane, Balham Road, Peel Road, and then out through the M55. And there's going to be 124 two-way large construction vehicle movements over that period. The traffic management is proposed along West Moss Lane. That includes restriction on car parking between 9 AM and 5 PM Monday to Friday, but also the temporary provision of additional car parking in lieu of on-street car parking that's going to be lost from West Moss Lane throughout that period. Highway, and particularly the construction, has been perhaps one of the stumbling blocks in the assessment, and has delayed obviously the application coming to committee, but with the traffic management that has been proposed, that's allowed the Highway Authority to remove their objections to the proposal. Relationship with neighbours. Nearest dwellings are located 90 metres to the east. So if I just flick back to my aerial image. So yeah, nearest neighbours 90 metres to the east with this property here, and I think it's 200 metres to the west with this property here. That separation certainly will ensure that there's no impacts from the built form of development itself in regards to dominance or loss of light from those structures. I think the main amenity issue for residents is potentially noise disturbance, and my understanding after speaking with the applicant is that noise disturbance is largely related to the fan operated cooling systems for the batteries. So obviously when the batteries are working, they're going to be working under temperature. They do need some kind of cooling mechanism. They will only kick in obviously though when the batteries are in operation. There's going to be times when the batteries aren't in operation, and equally they will only kick in when needed. So for example, if the weather is hot, then they will need to work harder to keep the batteries cooler. As I mentioned previously, the scheme has been revised to remove a 3-metre acoustic fence. That was due to visual concerns of that fence that I raised through the assessment. The applicant, as I say, has removed that fence sign. They've also provided an acoustic report, with that acoustic report supporting its removal. Our colleagues in Environment Protection have considered that report, and they also have no objection to the removal of that fence line. So on that basis, bearing in mind the benefits that the fence line removal will have for visual amenity, then I feel it is appropriate to ensure that that fence line is removed, bearing in mind that there isn't any reason for it to be in the scheme in the first place. There was a couple of objections, late objections, with regards to potential noise disturbance for horse riders. So there's a stables to the west. I know there's a livery certainly to the east within backland development to the houses along West Moss Lane, and the objection related to potentially the noise that was created from the BESS disturbing and obviously resulting in potential safety issues for riders. I spoke to the applicant on this, and they provided me with a response to say that the BESS itself and the noise that is generated is low level. It's not like a loud, sudden or an impact kind of noise that would potentially frighten or disturb horses. As part of my assessment, I also visited an operational BESS facility within Blackpool, and the noise that I witnessed when I was doing my site visit certainly corroborated what the applicant was saying. So from that, I would have to conclude that because there isn't these loud and sudden impacts, that the noise that would be created from the BESS would be unlikely to disturb or frighten horses or will lead to safety for riders. Fire safety. So this is something that's relatively new to planning assessments. We have the NPPF and planning practice guidance for renewable energy, which now allows consideration of fire safety within the assessment of plan applications. The PPG as well actively encourages ourselves to consult with fire services throughout the assessment of the plan application for PES development. The views of Lancashire Fire Service have been sought. They initially objected to the scheme, but in light of the revision that has been made, including the access arrangements, passing places within the actual development itself, the provision of water tanks, as well as additional information that has been provided by the applicant, including a fire strategy plan and a fire water management plan, that's been sufficient for the fire service to remove their initial objection, albeit they do still require additional information, which I've advised can be dealt with by condition. The report does detail other issues. My presentation is focused primarily on the ones that I consider to be of importance. Notwithstanding though, those other technical issues have been resolved. There's no outstanding matters with regards to ecology, biodiversity, flood risk, drainage, heritage or archaeology. So in this circumstance, there are certain harms that have been reported in my assessment. That obviously relates to loss of agricultural land, encroachment and harm to the landscape character, visual amenity, but obviously we've got to bear in mind that those harms reported are only for a temporary period of the 40-year lifespan of the development. There are obviously benefits to the development, such as supporting increased capacity for the supply and storage of electricity, assisting the government targets to cut green gas emissions, and delivery of the battery storage initiatives, as well as the stability and security of energy for the national grid, as well as BNG. So on that basis, based on the benefits, we think that those benefits outweigh the harm that's been reported by your officers. So the recommendation chose to grant consent, with that subject to adoption of the habitat regulation assessment that's been provided by the applicant and the suggested conditions.
Thank you, Rob, for that presentation. I'll hand over to members now with questions, please. Councillor Evans. And then Councillor Pittman, I think.
Sorry about that, Chair. Sorry for being late this morning. I assumed that there'd be more people in front of me when I put my hand up there, so apologies to fellow members if I've got in at the beginning.
Well, take the opportunity now that there is
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chairman. Couple of points, realistically. If I live till I'm 95 years old, then that will take 40 years, and I don't consider 40 years temporary, but, you know, I think it's stretching the word temporary to its maximum there. But there we go. From what I've heard of the report, and I've obviously read it beforehand, my initial concerns are based on that battery storage is going to be potentially a growth thing in our area. And so the conditions and the things that we put in place with this one, I'm assuming it's the first in file, but I'm not sure, are very important from my point of view, because they're fine once they're built until there's a problem. But as we're well aware of, once these things, if they do set on fire, they're not the easiest things to put out. So I've read quite a bit about the fire issues there, and I think it's really important that we do make sure that we put the strongest conditionality into that area as we possibly can.
Would you like me to respond?
Yes,
to that,
please.
Councillor Evans? So yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a couple of issues with the matters that you've raised. Obviously, yes, 40-year temporary consent is quite an extended period. But equally, at the end of that period, then it's expected that the development be removed from the site. There are conditions in place to ensure that that takes place, and that looks after the construction elements, so making sure that there's appropriate access arrangements to decommission the site. but also to regulate, if that's the right word, and make sure that the existing grade 3A agricultural land gets reinstated as well. In terms of fire safety, yes, it is a concern for the fire service. It's a type of development that slips through the cracks of building regulations, which is why there's now an onus on the planning system presently to obviously fill that void, so to speak. That's to do with obviously making sure the fire service has the right access, internal access, as well as obviously access routes to the site, availability of water, and again, if there is a fire, what happens with the contaminated water, for example. So the drainage strategy that's been provided by the applicant, that incorporates the attenuation pond. So when there isn't a fire, the surface water flows into the attenuation pond and then flows into the ditch that runs along the northern boundary. When there is a fire, there's a shut-off valve in that attenuation pond so that all fire water, which potentially could be polluted, retains within the attenuation pond, and then it will either be manually pumped off-site. So if I show you so this turning head here will allow obviously the access point potentially for the drainage of the pond, but equally the drainage strategy also refers to the possibility of a secondary drainage run from the pond to the southern side of the site, and then you'd have literally a tap release which would actively drain that pond of the contaminated water.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I think, and also presumably when you said there's a water tank on site there, that's to make sure that there's water there if we have a fire at the end of a drought when the attenuation pond's empty. I'm also interested in the fire suppression systems because I don't know an awful lot about fighting fires, but water and electrics don't always seem to go well together, so water's not necessarily the best product to treat an electrical fire with. You know, so powder suppressions and things of that nature would be important. And I suppose what I'm really saying, Rob, is that we need to be in front of the game with this, and I'm sure you are, that the risk assessment with a high-powered electrical facility needs to be taken into account at this stage rather than after an incident. And so that's what I'm really looking for. I take the point that 40 years could be considered a temporary period of time, but, you know, is this an opportunity for us to have more tree planting, more bush planting around the facility so that, you know, we're getting some environmental gain from it? Because I do think these kind of facilities are going to pop up all over the place. My understanding is that once power goes out from the grid, if some of the power's not used, they'll lose that power. So if they can store it out in the network as such, then they're losing less power. And obviously with our wind farm situation as well, there's an obvious argument there that, you know, is there some kind of facility to store the power at the substation points as well? So, you know, these decisions that we make here now may be very, very straightforward, but they could have quite large implications further down the line. So I would just gently suggest that the strongest conditions that we can put on something like this, the better. Thank you.
I would agree. This isn't the first best facility that we've dealt with in the borough. There was one on Peel Road that was determined by committee back in 2018, I think. That was refused. It was overturned on appeal for similar reasons that we've discussed today. Like I said before, that best facilities, they do fall through the cracks of building regs, and that's why we were encouraged to invite dialogue with the fire service through assessment of the plan application. The fire service have been heavily involved in this. The applicant has provided additional information, and that's got to the point whereby the fire service can actually support, but they still want additional information. Condition 7, which is on page 59, So that talks about the need for a battery safety management plan. But just to pick up on your point, Councillor Evans, in terms of suppression, for example, 7D, that requires the details of the suppression system to be agreed, as well as the battery specifications, detection systems, those kind of things. So everything that the fire service want is either within the information that's been provided or will be in the information provided by them to discharge the condition.
Is it possible I can come in just to
course,
build on
yeah.
that point?
Yeah.
Yeah, I attend meetings of my colleagues across Lancashire, and we've been approached a couple of years ago and again last year by the fire service, who are particularly concerned about battery storage facilities, because for the reason that you say that the traditional method of a fire engine turning up with a tank of water on the back and spraying water over it just doesn't work. And more than that, it generates acidic clouds and acidic runoff that's dangerous to fire service personnel, dangerous to the population, and dangerous to the environment. So that's why they've been very keen to get actively involved in when we do get planning applications for this type of facility. And that's what's happened here and led to the dialogue that Rob's explained. The condition that we've got on the agenda papers there that talks about having, you know, like you say, powder extinguishers and foam extinguishers and that kind of things for dealing with the batteries themselves, and then more traditional methods will be used on the other kit around it that no doubt would also catch fire in the event of a fire situation at the site. So we are very mindful of that and have used this very much as a kind of a test case to make sure that we are understanding what we need to do as a planning authority to make sure that these safeguards are put in place, and that in the event that there is a fire, that there's the best chance of dealing with it without it leading to catastrophic situations around that site. It's also something that is likely to be more common. We've got a couple of solar farm applications or prospective applications coming in, and they tend to include their own battery storage facility as part of that. You know, it's a big area. They have a battery storage. It's part of the overall. There used to be a load of panels and a transformer and a cable. Now it's a load of panels, a transformer, a battery storage facility, and a cable. So it's not going to be the last time we see these type of infrastructure being put in front of you. I don't think.
Thank you. Before I bring in the next speaker, going back very quickly to this business of temporary, permanent. I mean, I think all of us are sort of fairly uncomfortable with 40 years because it's sort of a lifespan for a lot of some people. And yeah, exactly. But I suppose in a sense, you know, the alternative is it's either temporary or permanent. And if it's permanent, that means there is no plan to remove it. There is a plan to remove it, and therefore, semantics, you probably can have to accept that it's temporary and that there is a plan to actually remove it after 40 years. So it can't be seen as permanent. But but we take the point. And the other thing, which you will have seen, obviously, and it's been discussed here on page 10, that the fire service themselves have been quite sort of demanding in terms of standards here, how this site is managed in terms of fire risk, etc. And it lists all those conditions, and looking through the conditions we've got pretty much embraces everything that they have suggested, and their approval, if you like, of this was conditional very much on these quite demanding conditions being upheld. And there's a statement on page 11 at the end of their statement, which the above conditions that are to be provided should meet the guidance provided by the National Fire Chiefs Council and grid-scale battery energy storage system planning, quite a mouthful. And the agreed detailed battery safety management plan shall thereafter be implemented. And I think it is very much cognizant of the risks and some risks which will have to be continually assessed, I think. Even though we've had a previous installation, you know, in Fylde, as the officers have explained. So hopefully that should give some assurance that actually when you look at the conditions, they are looking at this very seriously. Okay, I'll leave it there and bring in another speaker if that's all right, Councillor Evans. Councillor Pittman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentations. I think you've basically shown us what we are obliged to do if we're working in the national interest, because it's clear to me that the needs of the countryside are basically subservient to the needs of the national need. And that's shown, obviously, as you said, in what the inspectors have already decided. I support everything that Councillor Evans has said, and basically, I think that, in the future, although this may well return to agricultural use, if there is still a national need, it will be retained, and I've no doubt that the same principles apply, that basically the lights have to continue to be switched on, and we cannot avoid our obligations to provide the batteries necessary. I am concerned about the safety, although yes, the fire service have been obliged to provide a management plan for all this, and they are concerned about the virus. I still have to wonder whether National Grid are going to provide more resources, the financial resources, for what they are intending to do. It's all very well passing the responsibility over to the fire service, but it will come at a cost, and it won't just be on this particular area. Around Fylde, there will be more of these, I am sure, because that is the nature of things, and cable corridors are now part of our vocabulary. So I'm wondering whether the finances of it can be made clear in terms of providing that this is safe, not only for that particular area, but for the residents and the people who are concerned about these new battery facilities, because there hasn't been a good press lately on the risks. Substations have gone on fire, and I'm not 100% sure whether Lancashire Fire Service have actually done an operation of the sort that's happened elsewhere. And it is concerning, because we've just been through the reality of what happens when energy is so crucial that it's going to upset, overturn the rural areas. And as I said before, I accept that, yes, the government will always be able to say the national interest is more important than what is happening in Little Fylde. So I would like to know about the money that is being provided, or that should be provided, for the extra facilities, because we have fires up in the north in hot weather, and the fire service will be stretched if there are more than one fire. It doesn't just affect one field, it affects the whole area. So I would like to know more about how much how much resources are being given to our fire service, because we have got to think about the full situation in this area. So that's my question.
It seems, to try and sum up that question, that what you're asking about is that if the National Grid are putting something in place where there are certain risks, that the operator should be contributing to some of the
Yes.
costs of actually
Yeah.
managing
In
that
a big
particular,
way.
yeah, those risks. Okay. I don't know the answer, so I'm going to ask
Well, I
somebody
don't know them
who may know.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps as a clarification point, the applicant here isn't the National Grid. The applicant here is a private business who are looking to install this facility to build in with other private businesses that are contributing to the National Grid. So it's not the National Grid that are funding this, but it is the developer who will be responsible for putting all the fire protection measures in place that I mentioned in my previous answer. And perhaps building on that answer, the fire service reached out to us as a consequence of a fire at a battery storage facility in Liverpool, I believe, where their colleagues in the Merseyside Fire Service were struggling to deal with it. So it's something they've looked at what happened then, learned lessons from a practical fire situation, and that's why they are bringing forward these requests to us as the planning service and requests to the developers to put these measures in place. So it's not a sort of a theoretical risk assessment, it's an actual learning from an unfortunate situation that happened over in the Liverpool area. So that's why they're doing what they're doing, and why they are very keen to make sure that all possible fire situations are planned out as best as is possible. So that's, like I say, it's not the council, it's not the global taxpayer, it's the developer that's going to be providing all that information and all that fire protection. You also made a point earlier about the national planning policy. With any planning application, the starting point for the decision is the borough's local plan. Our local plan talks about protecting the countryside, but it allows certain forms of development, and as Rob explained earlier, this type of infrastructure that's supporting other countryside development is one of the exceptions to restraint in the countryside. So that kind of gives it half a start for being acceptable under the local plan. The local plan policy also requires an assessment of the landscape to make sure that it's not harmful to the rural character of that particular area, and that's what we've done here. That's why there are extensive areas of landscaping on the site. That's why we've assessed that this site may well be suitable, whereas other more exposed sites may not be. So you know, that's an assessment that we will still go through. And then alongside the policy assessment, there's the material consideration of national planning policy. So it's not necessarily driven by national policy, but that is a material consideration that we have to take into account, and the points that Rob made earlier about you know, the climate emergency and national policy about securing the nation's energy security are all things that we as a council, as every council, needs to take into account. So that's what we've tried to balance up here and come to the view that this scheme, as modified through the fire measures and the landscaping measures that have come about since it was first submitted, is now acceptable. Hence the recommendation.
Can I just say that as this is going to be something of the future, it would be good to go and visit one of these particular establishments to see actually what they look like on the ground. I don't know whether that's possible, but basically we need to be well acquainted with this sort of new type of application because obviously there are going to be more of them.
I visited one as part of my assessment in Blackpool, and like I said, I wanted to experience what the noise environment would be like in that area. When I was there, yeah, the noise environment was dominated by car traffic, and I was standing very close to where the battery stores were, which to me means it's a low level noise as opposed to any kind of impact noise, those kind of things. But yes, you are right. I've dealt with one before. I think that was the first in the borough. This is the second in the borough. There are going to be more. So from committee member perspective, then yes, there are out there. So there's no reason why, if you feel it necessary to help your assessment, to go out and visit those. I certainly found it of benefit. So
Thank you. That's really reassuring.
I just want to come in with a question, really, because we have had a previous application. You were saying 2018, I think it was. Would I be right in saying, without going back into the detail, that the conditions that we're attaching here and the recommended conditions from the fire service in that time will have changed, and they will have become far more stringent because we have more knowledge about the operation of these particular units? So therefore, compared with the previous application, if we put them side by side, we would probably see quite a difference in terms of these conditions. Would I be right in assuming that?
yes, most definitely. I think the main change since the initial BESS application that came through our doors is the need really to involve the fire service, and that obviously dictates the final scheme that's approved, but also any kind of additional information such as fire management plans, fire management strategies, those kind of things, drainage, which admittedly from recollection weren't considered as part of the initial scheme. So you can see from that the general evolution in terms of these developments coming forward, experience of the fire services in dealing with fires at these facilities, and how now the planning authorities can actually influence design and layout to make sure that the issues that have been actually found in terms of firefighting can be dealt with through that planning process as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ledger.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose this is mostly about like the balance between the positives that obviously will come from this, both in terms of energy security, but also where we're only necessarily considering this in such scrutiny because of its location in the countryside, I suppose. If this was on, somewhere else, perhaps a brownfield site, we'd be a lot more comfortable with it. But I do totally appreciate that alternative site assessments have shown there's no real feasible place nearby, which is a shame. But I think it's probably still better to build this than not build it, if that is the case. So trying to balance this with GD4 and the countryside. The comments about, I suppose, it being temporary, which I do appreciate, but I still hope to be here in 40 years. So I hope a level of temporary for me, perhaps. I think, so ideally we would not be building on the countryside. I suppose, ironically, agricultural land, the way we do with farming, it's not the same as a forest, so it does slightly contribute towards greenhouse gases, depending on how it's used. But I suppose the loss of 0.4 hectares will perhaps, on balance, if this is contributing towards renewable energy and any new wind farms or solar panels or anything that's achieving net zero, this might make the surrounding agricultural land ultimately better and safer to be farmed, because it makes the environment more secure and it prevents, or should prevent, an increase in temperatures and dangerous weather. And I suppose, from my point of view, I think as councillors and any politician at any level, we should be, the best decisions are made when we think about not just us, but our future generations, and we really do have to think with the environment quite far into the future. My only questions would be would be firstly around biodiversity net gain. I'm slightly confused because I think I saw something on I think it's page 47. Well, so I'm reading different things in the assessment, saying something around that the local planning authority are strongly encouraged to not include the biodiversity gain condition, but also there are different parts which say this will massively exceed. And is that something to do with the land in the north being changed to be more environmentally friendly, or I'm sorry, didn't understand that.
So yeah, I think we have or developers have a mandatory requirement now to deliver a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain. That's a more positive slant than what the MPPF requires, which is just a measurable net gain, which could be perceived to be 0.1%. So it's I suppose the starting point is they have to deliver that. So there's a significant enhancement just because of the BNG regulations itself as a minimum of 10%. The BNG is calculated in a number of different ways. Obviously, you have to have a baseline to calculate what the uplift will be. So you have to do a baseline score, and that'll be based upon, obviously, the habitat value of the site at the moment, which is an agricultural grass field. There obviously is some habitat value in terms of the hedgerow, which will be lost. But in terms of enhancement, then clearly there's significant value in terms of the amount of hedgerow that's being planted. So the distance between West Moss Lane and the northern tip is some 200 metres. So even that just stretch along the eastern boundary, that's a 200 metre stretch of hedgerow which isn't there at present. Similarly, we've got probably 120, 130 metre stretch to the western boundary that isn't there at the moment, plus you have hedgerows here, you have all these hedgerows within there. So when you start looking and breaking down the landscaping proposals, you can see there's quite significant benefit in terms of when you compare to what the existing habitat value of the site is. So I think it's referenced in here somewhere about there being significant BNG uplift, if that answers the question.
Thank you. No, that does clear it up. It was just there was so much mention of biodiversity net gain in different points and from different. But I think some of them were from people commenting. That clears that up for me. So thank you. I have two other small questions. One was so in theory, if within the next 40 years of the batteries that are there, if the applicant or the owner wanted to replace the current batteries with a newer battery, or upgrade it or something like that, would they need planning permission again? Or if it's on the site and it is a battery, can they just sort of replace it as they like?
It would depend upon, I suppose, if they wanted to replace one battery. If it was just a like-for-like replacement, then obviously clearly maintenance. But if they wanted to wholesale replace all the batteries, it would then depend upon the size, the scale of the battery, whether or not it would be seen to be just a like-for-like replacement, or if it's taller, wider, for example, then we'd need to take a decision at that time in terms of what, if you're the planning strategy, will be whether we would require a full plan application, whether they could just revise if this is approved, this current scheme.
Thank you. Yeah, I was sort of just curious because I know these batteries keep changing so much and they do improve so much. So, well, just curious, but that makes sense. And then I suppose my last question was, I guess, perhaps more of a comment, but more like if we're thinking that more similar applications in the future might be coming, whether they be battery, solar, or whatever, given that this is currently this is going to be on the countryside because there was no alternative site, are we as Fylde doing anything to be looking for better sites, brownfield sites or sites that we could proactively identify as places for batteries and solar rather than having to consider building on the countryside.
Not that I'm aware of, but the important thing, I suppose, in terms of the location of best facilities is grid connection. So you can't just put a best facility next to a pylon line, for example. You need to have an approval from National Grid, because my basic understanding is that you can only connect at certain points. You can't just connect wherever you want to. There's certain grid connections which are available, and then the provider will then bid against other providers to try and get that. So it's not a simple case of saying we have a spare brownfield plot on an employment site at Whitehills, for example. If there isn't the connection, the grid connection there, then obviously it's going to discourage people to go there. And again, the longer the connection distance from the best facility itself and the point of connection, the more additional costs involved. And I know from dealing with other solar farm developments, the connection viability hangs around a 2 kilometre distance. So anything beyond 2 kilometre distance becomes unviable. So it's not, from a council perspective, it's going to be difficult because we don't necessarily know where the point of connections are to then dictate where those brownfields within that a 2 kilometre radius, for example, would be to ensure that there's viable sites coming forward.
Thanks, that makes sense. The only other, it's not a question, it's a comment I've heard, just totally different really, but I have a battery at home. I got one last year. I mean, this is a totally different scale, obviously, but combined with solar panels, it is saving me a lot of money. So hopefully, with the combination of the wind farms and solar, it will ultimately lead to much cheaper electricity for people in this area eventually. So, good thing. Thank you.
And just a comment, I mean, a couple of comments for your contribution, Councillor Ledger. I think you've got, obviously, to the nub of the problem that with a lot of planning applications, it's very much about balance because, you know, it would be dishonest to say that in a countryside site there isn't some damage in terms of visual amenity and neighbourhood amenity because you've got an operation that doesn't exist there at the moment, so there's going to be some detrimental impact locally. The other thing I would say, but it's balancing up then the fact that in the report it makes it very clear that a material consideration is that, you know, in terms of national infrastructure projects and the need for energy, etc., that this as a similar application had, you know, was turned down and then it was given on appeal, and I think there was I can't remember what the word was now, but associated infrastructure, I think was the word that was used by the planning inspector, and this is seen with the GD4 one, and I think it was D, but as associated infrastructure. So this argument that you were making about the greater need, I think that's where that comes in from a planning point of view. You know, we have to take into consideration, it might not be the determining factor, and that's where every member comes to a decision in terms of that balance themselves, but that is a material consideration in terms of determining this. The other thing briefly that I wanted to mention, I think it says in the report in terms of sort of summary assurance that officers actually conducted, you know, in terms of this alternative site assessment, if you notice, they weren't satisfied with what had been done and went a bit further. And I think that would be something I think that we should encourage, that if an operator is required to provide a certain formal assessment and we don't feel it goes far enough or they haven't done it in the way that we think, then we can take it in our own hands to do certain things. And I think we should applaud that, because obviously site selection is very sensitive, bearing in mind all the things that you raised. I'm going to go...
May I just
of course,
come
yes.
in again on the back of that? Thank you, Chairman. Again, to address one of the points that Councillor Ledger just made, at the moment a group of councillors are looking at revising the local plan, which will take us through to, I think it's 2042 if I'm not wrong, and that will cover things like use and reuse of different types of land, countryside land, industrial land, etc. So I think it's a very valid point, and it's certainly something that councils will be conscious of when they're making those revisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you. Councillor Goodman, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I have an observation and a question, although what I'm going to say has partly been answered already. My heart lifted when I saw that there was a mistake in the amount of hedgerow that had to be removed when I read the late observations last night. However, then I found it was 4 times as much. But, I will now say but, I do realise it's important for the fire service particularly to have that access. I'm just wondering, could we possibly have that site layout plan that we had originally? I think that might be helpful for me. It's been mentioned with regard to Councillor Ledger's question about the 40 metres of hedgerow. Is that right at the very bottom there?
Yeah, it's identified by these red lines.
Yes.
So initially, there was just one access arrangement proposed, which was in this locality here, and that's where the 10-metre removal comes from. But obviously, with the access proposals being revised in light of fire service comments, the introduction of 2 access points has necessitated removal of additional hedgerow. That's 40 metres, but that is the only mistake in the report. The landscape assessment where that is correct. So apologies for my bad.
No, I did notice that. So we've got 2 access points there. I'm wondering, because of the nesting season, March to September, my other concern was apparently small birds like robins and wrens nest only a few metres off the ground. So they're going to be quite low down within that hedging. I'm assuming nothing would be done with that removal. Can contractors still get into that site? Or is the removal of the hedgerow limited to those nesting seasons? I guess in a nutshell, rather than speak a great deal about this, that was my question.
So, yeah, as part of the assessment process, we consult with ecologists, Greater Manchester Ecological Unit. They provide feedback on all things ecological and biodiversity within the development. It's become standard practice for schemes like this where any site clearance is involved to put conditions on which require site clearance, removal of vegetation to occur outside of the bird nesting season, unless survey work is done prior to the clearance to establish that there aren't any bird populations within the area that's going to be cleared. So that condition is condition 20 on the committee papers, page 64.
Sorry, if I might just say, on page 14 it did say no work to trees or shrubs shall occur or earthworks commence between the 1st of March and 31st of August in any year unless a nesting bird survey has been experienced. So thank you for that, that's really helpful.
I suppose, Councillor Goodman, as well, it demonstrates what we've been talking about, this business with the hedgerow, that ideally in the countryside we want to retain that, despite the fact there's an operation. But then you then have to balance it up with the safety considerations, and if you're going to have an operation of this kind and the fire service is saying we need 2 accesses, that's where, again, the compromise is made, isn't it? In terms, I mean, it's difficult, but going back to Councillor Ledger's point, it is that balance of different things that sometimes conflict and weighing up really what has to be done here to make this an acceptable application. But I think it's really good that we raise these points because we all care about our countryside, and we might take the argument that there's a greater need and a global sort of demand, etc., and all the rest of it. But we want to protect our countryside as much as we can. And if we're going to do these things, that's why it's really good that a lot of the debate this morning is around conditions, and you know, there might be an acceptance to some extent that this may have to be done for all sorts of reasons. But if this is going to happen, that it's part of our job to ensure that, as far as we can, the conditions are as appropriate as possible and quite demanding. So, thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions, I think, really. When they initially said that they're going to put an acoustic fence up, why would they say that?
If it wasn't needed.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Green
Turn your
room.
microphone
I'm
off.
sorry.
Turn this one off.
I can't answer that question. Obviously, they thought because there's houses about potentially that, well, let's put an acoustic fence in the scheme. I don't know. But obviously a 3 metre fence in the countryside is quite alien in appearance from a landscape and visual amenity perspective. I wanted to make sure that it was really necessary. So I tasked them with identifying and whether it was necessary or not. They could have come back and said, yes, it is necessary. So my assessment would then have had to take into account the presence of an acoustic fence line. The acoustic report that came back that supported the revision came back identifying no issues for neighbours. So as far as our colleagues in environmental protection are concerned, there's going to be no noise disturbance, thereby removing the need for the fence line.
That's fine. It's just that the sceptical side of me thought, well, why would they say it in the first place if they didn't need it?
Yeah.
That was just one. If it's not noisy, to the extent it would impact on anybody, it's not noisy. That's
And to be fair, Councillor Nixon, as well, the other side of this is that, having looked at this again, the assessment actually will provide something that visually is more acceptable, because there isn't quite the need for the acoustic control that we thought. Yeah.
And mentioned in the report, the contaminated water, it will come off site, drain. Where will it drain?
Likely, it's not for definite, but it's likely that the fire water will be contaminated. So that the battery storage areas within the purple line here, all water, fire water falling on there, contained in there, and then drains into the attenuation pond. That is of sufficient size to accommodate, I think, quote me if I'm wrong, but probably 9 hours worth of firefighting water. It's held in that chamber, in that attenuation pond, sorry. Usually, the attenuation pond would normally just allow surface water to flow into the dike. Now, obviously, with it being polluted water from the fire water, there's a stop valve that prevents the release of that water. Instead, there's two options proposed. There's one that the water will be took away manually, so that's why this turning head's provided, to provide access so that the water can be pumped into tankers and taken away from the site. Alternative, there's a second option proposed which provides for a drainage run from the pond to Westmoss Lane so that the water can be tapped off from that point instead. But it'll literally be held in that pond and tankered away.
That's the preferred option, as opposed to coming. It was this, like, it would be tapped off down this other, and go where then?
It'll still be, it would be like a hose pipe. It would literally be from that point there. It would be put into a tanker and then driven off site. Yeah,
At some point
it has to be.
it
Has to be disposed of off site if it's polluted. It can't. It can't be discharged into the water courses.
And the cable corridors that you showed on one of the, what are the distance of, what's that actual distance, and how is that going to impact on the land that's crossing over?
The cable corridor that's shown in the submission, it follows Westmoss Lane, and then it follows Holmoss Lane, and then it follows, I'm not sure what that road's called, I think it's just an unnamed track into the substation. The route that's shown is all hard surface, so it'll be positioned beneath the tarmac of Westmoss Lane and the hard standings of Holmoss Lane without encroachment into grass verges at all.
And how much sort of disruption is that going to cause once that's been dug up?
Well,
Does it-
the distance is about, I think it's about 1.5 kilometres, 1,500 metres. So there will be disturbance, of course. Time frames, I'm not sure. But equally, it's something that Electricity North West can do under their permitted development rights. So we really don't have any control over that element. But what I would say is if it didn't run under the hard surfaced areas, it would have to run through fields, and then obviously you then have to provide easements so that farmers don't plough over the cables, for example, so that then reduces the amount of agricultural land that's available for use. So I think from an office perspective, the preferred route certainly is to follow the road and bridleway route, certainly.
Yeah, that's fine. It just didn't sort of... you couldn't tell that was a road off, that it just looked like it went across 3 or 4 fields. But it is an actual road.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
I've remembered
Sorry.
now.
And this 40-year issue, none of us are going to be here. This council's possibly not going to be here. Who's going to monitor it? Who is going to look after? Who's going to be responsible for that in 40 years?
Andrew, boss?
Is bizarrely there's a question about local government reorganisation, because I really don't think it could be a planning matter, but no, I mean, I know where you're going. Yeah. It'll be the appropriate authority in the way that,
I suppose the key thing is that after the 40-year period, it won't have planning permission, so any operation beyond that period would be unauthorised.
There is in part of the condition, if the batteries are not used for 12 months, then it gets reverted back to the farm. Who's monitoring that? How would we know whether a battery's been used or not?
Good question. It's there as more as a fail-safe. I have had a conversation with the applicant about this condition, because there are certain elements which could prevent the operation over 12. So we've been talking about fire, for example. So a fire on the site would prevent its operation for 12 months, I would think, in the sense that they've got to deal with all the decontamination of the pond, got to get the new batteries back on site, connect everything up, those kind of things. It's a fail-safe really for ourselves that we can take enforcement action if we consider it necessary, and we could then put it to the if we suspect that it hasn't been operating and been in use for 12 months, then we can obviously ask the applicant or the provider at that time to demonstrate, and if it hasn't been on the basis of that evidence, then that's our key then to take that enforcement action.
Okay, thank you. Last one. Given this is a private enterprise they're not doing it because they love the countryside, they're doing it because they're making money out of it.
It's a private enterprise.
Yeah.
Whether they are and how
they're going to be
much, I do
making
not
money out of
know.
it. So as a council, should we, I mean, we've had 106, we've got biodiversity net gain, so should we not be ensuring that once these facilities are on our land, that we are gaining some benefit for it, whether it be a guaranteed cheaper electricity in the area? Should we be writing something, if we're going to get more of these, should we be writing something into our planning policy that ensures our people in our area benefit from the loss of our countryside?
I think you're talking about community gains, aren't you?
Yeah.
We can only secure contributions of that nature where there's a policy basis to support that, and at the present there isn't. I think as the Vice Chairman said in response to an earlier question, the work on the local plan that we're doing will cover not just housing and employment land. It's very likely it's going to look at this issue, because we all know that energy security nationally, but also local provision of energy arrangements is something that's now much more in focus than it has been in the past. So I suspect that this is something that could get looked at as part of that process. And I've made a note here to raise that with Paul the new Mark about that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Chairman. Rob, you talked about the Blackpool Best site. I wonder if you could give me a little bit more information regarding where that is, what surrounds it, if there's any more detail that you could tell us about that, please.
Sorry, it's Moore Park Avenue in Blackpool. So just to zoom out a little bit, where are we going to recognise? Blackpool Vic. It's not an area that I'm very familiar with, to be honest with you. So if I drop my little yellow man on there, we can see what the facility potentially is going to look like. Obviously, in our circumstance, we're looking at a countryside location as opposed to more of an employment setting. Once mature, though, we're going to have a lot of landscaping to reduce. It's not going to hide it, but it's going to certainly soften and reduce the landscape, the visual impact. There's also a housing group, obviously to the south. That's about 100 metres away. So it's comparable, I would say, in terms of distance to the closest houses that we're dealing with. So the closest house is about 19 metres away from the best facility that we're dealing with. I suppose the only difference with this site is that Moore Park Avenue it's a busy road, so the road noise from the traffic is louder and masks certainly the noise from the best facility in that location. But when I was up close and when there weren't parked cars coming along, then it is a quiet. It's a hum. It's an odd noise to describe. It's certainly not like an impact like somebody with a hammer or something like that. It's a constant hum, but that's only when the battery's in operation, and the batteries aren't going to be in operation 24 hours a day. They're only going to be in operation when the batteries are storing electricity, but when there is sufficient heat to need the cooling fans to kick in.
Can I show you to another facility? Can I just swap seats?
That way. You're going to pen with them?
Yeah.
Zoom out. There you go. That way. Down.
This is the... Oh, get rid of that. This is the substation at Pemberton, where the wind farm cable's going. So that's Preston as you come out through Liverpool Road in Pemberton. So this is a BESS facility that's perhaps in more advanced construction at the back of that site. So this is an old transformer when the transformer was here and they replaced it with this kit here. So what you're seeing here is the batteries are these green shipping container size facilities, and then they have the fan elements alongside them. In this location, it's more of a rural situation, albeit an industrial rural situation there. But the planning authority here you've got the drainage pond, you've got the access with hedging around it that no doubt will be enhanced. So it's a similar sort of arrangement, albeit unlike the one at Blackpool that Rob took you to. This is tucked away, so when you don't see anything from the actual public vantage point other than that it's down that track. But that's the kind of setup that it is that you're looking at, if that gives a little bit more context to what you're thinking, what we're determining today.
Are they houses, Andrew, to the west?
There are, yeah, so there's a terrace of, there's a farm and a farm workers' cottages, another farm here. That's a former farm. So there are residential properties in the vicinity, but it is the character of that area is very much dominated by the substation that you can't miss when you see the substation buildings and all the associated industrial infrastructure that go with that type of infrastructure.
Thank you.
Is that helpful?
It was, yeah.
Councillor Farrington and then
Councillor Farrington.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, what an intriguing debate, and I totally agree with the sort of general message that some of my colleagues have woven into their comments and questions in relation to setting the bar high. A lot of pertinent comments by Councillor Evans and Councillor Pittman, I thought in particular early on, are correct in that we're setting precedents here, because this is a bit of the Wild West, isn't it, when it comes to utilities and energy. I mean, that is evident, very evident in utility companies that you see come and go, set up payment structures for customers and then go bust. And relating to this, it just gives me a little bit of concern that there's obviously a few private enterprises that have joined together, probably under an umbrella company. I'm sure they've made it into a limited company with a 40-year obligation to decommission a site at the end of it. Now, looking at what I've just said there with utility companies, it is wholly possible that if they don't monetize their operations sufficiently, that they'll just go bust and have no legal obligations as a limited company, and then leave a bit of land there that needs decommissioning. So I've got two questions arising from that thought process, and the first one is how deeply have we dug into these companies, and how confident are we that they actually can stand the test of time? Perhaps a side point from that is there any individual legal responsibility attached to that? And the second point is, if there aren't any long-term legal responsibilities by the applicant, who, where and who has the responsibility to decommission at the end of the 40-year period? Thank you. Okay,
I'm going to question whether certainly the first part of that question is a planning consideration. And I'm not sure it is for the forum, but by all means raise it, and so thank you for that. But I don't know. I'm going to ask the officers to respond to those two particular points. Councillor Farrington, thank you.
Yeah, I suppose the first point, no, we don't do background checks. We have to deal with the application that's in front of us, irrespective of who might develop it. There's no reason to say the planning permission sits with the land, so there's no reason to say this developer might follow through with construction. It could be sold on, it could be built out by another developer, for example. So for that reason, simply we would not do those background checks. In terms of responsibility for decommissioning, I don't care who does it, as long as it gets done and we have the conditions in place to make sure that that decommissioning will be agreed 12 months before it is actually due to be decommissioned, and then obviously we have conditions to make sure that the decommission will happen as well.
I think the issue I have with that, and what I'm saying, is that we don't know where technology will go, whether something will be made obsolete, whether those companies leave and exist. So how can you impose condition 12 months prior to decommissioning if there's no legal entity on which to impose those conditions?
Yeah, well, the condition isn't imposed on any legal entity. It's imposed on the planning permission, which relates to the land. So it would bite on whichever legal entity owned that land at the time that we needed to enforce that condition. It's probably a bit similar to mobile phone masts, where, you know, going back 20 years, that was a new technology that various companies set up and put the infrastructure in that was, you know, an unattractive necessity of mobile phone systems working. And that's kind of evolved. The companies have changed, but the majority of the of the infrastructure remains in place, albeit it may well have changed as technology's changed, but somebody is still there maintaining and operating that infrastructure because it's a necessity of modern life, in the way that I'm imagining solar farms, wind farms, you know, other renewable energy sources are going to be a necessity of energy supply needs for the country moving forward. And battery storage seems to be, you know, a sort of an inherent part of those operating efficiently when the, you know, the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing, etc.
Okay, I think what I take from the final, your comments there is actually, even if the technology isn't there, whether it is or not, we don't know, is that there will be a landowner still, and the responsibility will fall to the landowner, and that answers my question. So thank you.
Thank you for those points, Councillor Farrington. Councillor Harrison.
Thank
But simply, yes. The initial assessment by the Highway Authority flagged a potential and requested additional information with regards to construction access along West Moss Lane. That resulted in vehicle tracking of the largest construction vehicles being undertaken, and that flagged that there could be potential conflict between those construction vehicles and parked cars that residents use on street along that. That's then prompted the applicant to look at alternative solutions to prevent that conflict. The first solution was to widen West Moss Lane in certain places, but that widening encroached into the tree group to the south, which is protected. So obviously from my perspective, that wouldn't be acceptable. That's then prompted them to focus on this temporary traffic management order, which basically prohibits the parking in certain areas of West Moss Lane, so that construction vehicles don't meet the conflict of parked cars when they are accessing the site. That traffic management will only be in place Monday to Friday 9 till 5, and in lieu of the potential parking space that are going to be lost, there's going to be temporary parking spaces provided close by along West Moss Lane, where they will be unimpacted by the construction vehicles. That strategy has been supported by the Highway Authority.
Thanks for that, Rob. So I realise I didn't have my microphone on when I asked the question, but just to confirm, that satisfies the Parish Council's objection.
Yes, it does.
Thank you very much. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chairman. I think it's been a really helpful debate, to be honest with you, and I think quite often we get charged with how did we get to this stage. So when we actually really look at something which is in its infancy but is going to become more prolific, it's crucially important. You know, our primary goal, responsibility, is to keep our residents safe wherever we can from any future development, and this kind of development has its hazards and has its risks to it. So it is our duty to make sure that the conditionality that we put on a private company whose aim is to make money, we put the strongest conditions possible on that business, and it also sets the marker for future developments that they know if they want to come into FAL that they're going to have to meet a very high bar. So I would urge officers to really work constructively with all parties to make sure that those conditions are as strong as they possibly can be. Taking on board one of the points that Councillor Ledger mentioned, I think it's interesting as well. We know lithium batteries have got some issues with them, but as batteries develop and come along, there may well be something which stores more power and has less risk. So I think it would be really helpful if one of the conditions was put in place that as improvements are made over the 40-year lifespan of this site and any site, that we would ask them to come back to us to give an updated risk assessment, if that's possible, on any new infrastructure on the site. And I would also think it would be beneficial for the future planning to see from the fire service what their emergency planning strategy would be if one of these sites was to set on fire. So that would help us when we're looking at future applications.
Can I take those?
Please do.
To the officers and get a response for that, because there was something about changing in batteries, etc., over a period of time, and then the response from the fire service in terms of emergency, etc., on site.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Chairman. I think there's 3 points that were raised. I think the first one relates to how we deal with these things. And as was mentioned earlier, we've learnt a lot between the Peel Road one and this one. Through, ourselves as officers dealing with it, obviously Rob's been able to answer the questions. He's looked at this in detail, has been to other sites, all that sort of thing. So that will only help how we deal with these things moving forward. And the consultees have learnt more. The fire service, as I mentioned earlier, have gained a lot of knowledge from unfortunate incidents elsewhere as to how to predict and plan those out of being a problem. So hopefully when we do get further applications, we will build on that knowledge and we'll be able to follow that through, which I do think these are more likely to be delivered as part of solar farm developments rather than standalone facilities moving forward. But coming on to the second point, as technology changes, perhaps the mobile phone mast example that I gave earlier is the one to follow. A mobile phone mast that was built in 1995 isn't fitting the technology that it needs to fit now. So the operators have had to come back to the council for planning permission or whatever the approvals that they use are. That will happen with this one. So if there are looking to change the batteries to something else, we don't need to put a condition on it, because if the batteries are going to be materially different to what's there now, they would need a further planning application. And that would then allow consideration of whether the fire impacts or the ecology impacts or the other emissions, they might need bigger fans, who knows. You know, we'd look at all that as part of the assessment of that particular application at that stage. So the fire, the condition to require details of changes just isn't necessary, because it will be new development. Was that 3 points?
Training as well, in terms of
Fire emergency.
Training, yes, sorry, the training plan, that's something that, thank you, that's something that there's a condition that requires those details to be provided. So in terms of their fire protection measures, and we will continue to be consulting with the fire service on any applications and taking their advice on them.
I mean, I could suggest we perhaps, once that condition gets to the point of discharge, we could perhaps do an informative note for members outlining what it is. But it seems to me that perhaps is more of a training initiative for members more than anything else, which perhaps isn't associated to the application. But
I personally think that would be a good thing,
reading.
because I think one of the themes of this morning is that we do need reassurance as members.
Yeah.
You know, we're not experts, etc., and we have to stick to planning considerations. But part of the planning brief, I think, is to be reassured in terms of certain aspects, and I think an informative note would go some way to help us with that.
I agree with that, absolutely.
Okay.
Definitely.
And maybe we could put a condition in. I don't know if it's feasible to put a condition on there that that the cooling fans that are used are the quietest fans available, not necessarily the cheapest fans available, but whether that's a condition in terms of if we're acknowledging that there may well be a low level hum, then from the fans, then is that something that we could work into that, because we're acknowledging that that's a downside to the residents.
When we look at applying conditions, we have to look at whether they're reasonable and necessary to do so. the acoustic report, that detailed obviously the potential noise emission from the development per se. It's hard to say with assurance, but the 90-metre separation distance to neighbours, if it was a lot closer to those neighbours, I would perhaps feel more encouraged that we should provide standards. But irrespective of that, there's an expectation that the fans, the development that is built out in accordance with the submitted information, which is the acoustic report, which identifies that there isn't a noise emission problem for the neighbours adjacent. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments that members want to make? Is anybody willing to move approval? Councillor Settle, Councillor Wilder seconding it. And I suppose the thing to add is the request for an information note regarding what particular matter that we just discussed.
Yeah, I think it's not part of this decision. I think it's something we'd cover separately.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So as long as members are happy with that.
training type thing
Right.
as we do further down the line.
So you have the recommendations in front of you and you have the full details of the application there. So all those in favour, please indicate. Those against, I don't think there are any, and I don't think there are any abstentions, so that was unanimous. Okay, that's carried. I'm going to allow a 10-minute comfort break because that was quite a long, intensive session. I think I need one, but so can we be back in 10 minutes and then we can carry on?
At 11:30, Chairman, would that be a useful time?
I'm just aware of how busy officers are in terms of electoral duties, etc. So if we can get back for 10 minutes and then, you know, see where we go. Okay, thank you. Right, members, can we get cracking, please? Thank you. It's just coming up to past. We've just had over 10 minutes. A bit shorter than if we had started at past. Just making the point. There we are. Okay. Right, the next application you can find on page 72 of the report, and item 2. And this regards, I'm not going to go through the full proposal, I'll let the officers do that. The stables off Lodge Lane, Singleton, and change of use, etc. So I'll hand over to Andrew, and he'll also make an explanation about another situation. Thank you. I think we also ought to mention, and the officers, Andrew will explain the rationale of this, that we won't be having the planning meeting on the next one in May, and he'll explain the reason why, okay, the rationale behind that.
Yeah, I was looking at what applications we have that are ready to go, and we don't have any that are there. So I'm looking to cancel the 21st meeting. It's a combination of things. This meeting's been pushed back a week because of Easter, when we would have been writing the reports, and then so there's a shorter gap to the next meeting, and we've had a number of big applications that are nearly there, but there's still a few bits of things, consultees like Rob's fire service thing that we need to get those consultation views back before the application's ready to come. So with that being the case, I thought it would, rather than have a meeting that might have had a household application or something like that that wasn't necessarily getting good justification for everybody getting together, that it would be worthwhile sort of at an early stage cancelling the meeting. So raised that with the chairman and vice chairman this morning, and Catherine will be sending out a cancellation in message for your diaries and what have you later. That means that the June meeting may well be a bigger meeting than normal, but that is kind of why we're here, to do big things. So unfortunately, you know, that's I'll give you a month off, but then I'll make you work twice as hard the month after.
And I think the only point that I would add to that you know, that there are occasions, I think, when one or two members have sort of raised this in terms of, well, if there are so many issues to be resolved, you know, do we need to, actually judge this particular planning application? And I think there were a combination of circumstances here that made it sensible, you know, rather than look at the time framework and fill it. It was much better in terms of looking at the order of applications and the nature of those applications, and also where they were in that process of being determined, and information coming through. If there were doubts, then I think this was the right call, particularly being, you know, that this one, as Andrew said, had been put back and within a couple of weeks would be here again. And then you'd be sitting there going, well, why hasn't that been sorted out, or why that? So it gives officers a bit more time, I think, to resolve some of the outstanding issues. So I hope I don't think we need to vote on that. No. But, you know, everybody's in
Just
agreement to that.
celebrate it.
Yes, well, let's use a neutral thing and accept, you know, because we all look forward to these meetings with great relish, I know. So, but we accept the need to, you know, perhaps just go to June for the next meeting rather than in May. Okay, thank you. Okay,
thank you,
back
Chairman.
to you again.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I get on to presenting the item, you'll notice I've added a little bit of glamour to the top table this morning. This is Beth Winstanley, who's one of the planning officers who works in the team. She's been the case officer on this application. So in future, you've seen other planning officers here, in future meetings, I'm looking to perhaps ask the planning officers to present their own items a little bit more. So as a bit of a gentle introduction to Beth doing that, she's going to sit here and we may find a question for you, Beth. Right, but
there is an agreement, by the way, because I had a word with her that she's not going to heckle. Right.
So, turning to the application, this is a site for some stables that are off Lodge Lane in Singleton. So to picture ourselves in the borough, this is Singleton Village here. Obviously the Windy Harbour bypass comes through now on this route, and then you've got Little Singleton, which is where the petrol station is that we all used to look forward to getting to after queuing in the traffic up this hill. So this site is roughly midway between those two locations, where it's accessed from some stables accessed off a farm track. So the site's in the countryside, and the application in front of us is to convert the stable building into a dwelling, and then use the land around it for parking, garden areas and what have you. The application's at committee because we've had an objection from the parish council, who raised concerns with it being development in the open countryside. Notwithstanding that, it's recommended for approval, and there are a couple of extra conditions in the late observations, which I'll get to later. So, slightly zoomed in image, this is Lodge Lane, which is the road that connects Singleton to the traffic lights, and then we've got a track that comes off here and leads to, it's just a farm track, so at least services a number of fields. We've got the application building is this one here, stables and a sand paddock to the rear, exercise fields. There's a further agricultural store building next to it, and then there's another stables and hay store and sand paddock set up that's to the other side of the road there. Looking at it in pictures, Beth's managed to take some atmospheric winter shots from the top of the lane. So this is the junction of the track with Lodge Lane, looking down to the stable building in question, which is this one here. Looking at it closer up from the track, see the access point, the parking area that exists, and then the stable building itself. Just some other images, you can see that it's a sort of a substantial stable building, L-shaped footprint. So the application scheme is to convert the building. So using the existing access, using that parking area that you saw from the image, using the building as it is, and using the land around it for garden area. I think the next slide has a site plan. There we go. So in terms of the layout of the building, you've got an L-shaped building as it is. So some of the stables that are on this wing are converted into remaining as individual rooms being bedrooms. The stables that are on this wing are joined into a single room, which provides the reception facilities for the property, with a door punctured into the back, and then a small decking area added onto the rear elevation. In terms of alterations to the building as part of the conversion, you saw from the photographs that it's a substantial building. There's no real extension to it, although there is this element of glazing that I'm tracing over with the pointer there. So that's a glazed wall that's being added, dropped from the bottom of the overhang of the roof, the existing roof, and that forms an internal corridor to the building, and that means that what is currently the external wall of the stables along that line becomes an internal wall to the building and allows internal access between the bedrooms without the need to provide an internal corridor into the existing stable area. Excuse me. So while you have got technically an extension to the building, you haven't got any real increase in the footprint other than the overhang being filled in. You've got some other changes in terms of the roofs having roof lights. There's some circular windows being added in to allow light into the various rooms around the back elevation. These are followed through on the other back elevation. You've obviously only got two of the images there, but the other work's the same. So that's the extent of the building works associated with the conversion, essentially. And these are some 3D images that the applicant's agents provided to show how the building works. So that gives you the context of what I've described in terms of they're intending to show this glazing and then the stable doors behind it in that top image. So in terms of the sort of the policy situation, the site's in the countryside, restrictive policy, certain exceptions. One of those exceptions is that second bullet point there, where you can reuse permanent substantial buildings. So our test is whether it is a substantial building. So we've obviously visited the site, Beth's visited the site. There's a structural report with the application that confirms that it's a blockwork building rendered. It's got a substantial construction. Part of Beth's site visit, she goes into the building to check that structural survey is an accurate representation. And we obviously accept that it is a substantial building. It's obviously a permanent building. It's not timber stables. It's not an old chicken shed or anything like that. It is something that's a permanent building. The other element that we're looking at is the extent of the works that are being done to facilitate the conversion. So there is this element of glazing under the roof, but it's not the case that there's another wing being added to make the building big enough. There's not an increase in the roof height to get second floor bedrooms in or anything like that. What we're looking at is something that's relatively modest changes in terms of adding the windows, putting the glazing on. It's using the existing curtilage to the site for the garden. It's not extending into agricultural land or anything like So we're satisfied that the extent of the works is something that fits with the building, but also fits with that rural character that's the overarching aim of policy GD4 to retain the setting of the building. It will, because it won't be any bigger, it won't encroach anywhere. It will still have the same similar visual impact on the landscape. So as a result of that, we feel that the policy exception that's set out there is one that's satisfied by this scheme. So moving on from that, we've looked at the other considerations, looked at the access arrangements. The Highway Authority are satisfied that the junction of the track with Lodge Lanes is a suitable one. It's on the outside of a bend where there's good visibility. So obviously the access track is just a track, but that's suitable to serve a very limited number of dwellings. Obviously the vehicle movements will be very similar to when there's a stable building that's presumably the horses get mucked out every day and that kind of thing. The parking that's provided is defined on the site plan, so that meets the standards. The dwelling provides suitable amenity, so there's no residential neighbours near to it to be affected by the works. But looking at amenity the other way, the building's providing rooms that are big enough, 4 bedrooms. The dwelling as a whole is big enough, and so there's no concerns over amenity for the householders. Obviously there will be some rural influences from the agricultural building next door, the stables across the road, but that's part and parcel of you know, them wanting to either go ahead with the conversion or occupy it. The element that's in the late observations relates to ecology. So when we were putting the report together, we didn't have the final views from GMEU, our ecology consultants. We didn't think that they were critical to the decision, which is why we've proceeded to put it on the agenda. But Beth's chased them, we've had those comments now. They don't make any objections to it, but they have highlighted that the building is quite well used by swallows. So they've suggested additional conditions to those which we perhaps preempted when we put the report together about specifically providing additional swallow nesting facilities both in the building and in locations around it. So that's something that's covered as a condition on the late observations paper, alongside further habitat works as a separate condition that they've promoted on that point as well. So that's something that we would like to add into the recommendations in the agenda papers. The final thing I wanted to touch on is the parish council's concerns. They've given us some relatively simple comments to say that they object to the scheme based on it being developed in the countryside. It is development in the countryside, but it is a form of development in the countryside that we are satisfied complies with policy GD4, and that's where we've come up with that recommendation. Overall, the recommendation is to grant permission subject to the agenda and the additional conditions.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything? Okay. Councillor Nixon, please.
Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you. On the late observations, I'm just assuming it's just a typo, but it says swallows. They note that submitted report found large number of nests and evidence that a number of these are in active use. The ecologists conclude that the information provided indicates that there is a substantial population of bats. Should that say substantial population of swallows?
Probably. Sorry, yes, it should.
It should, right. It's just, it skewed it completely then. I'm thinking, well, is it bats or is it swallows?
Yeah. Sorry.
Right, that's all right.
That's the only bit that I've written.
Is it? Right.
We won't draw any conclusions.
Apologies, committee. Yes, that is an error. The reference from the ecologist is
It's swallows, not bats. Right, okay.
Councillor Griffiths, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I had concerns about this, but since I've received the late observations and the swallow being covered, the bats, and there's some form of management review,
BNG.
I'm quite happy to propose this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Settle.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm also very happy with the proposal. I'll second it.
Okay, we have a proposer and seconder. I just want to say that when I looked at this particular scheme, I had some reservations, as Councillor Griffiths did, and then the late obs came in, and that sort of settled my mind a little bit. And I just felt that if you want, there's the GD4 thing, isn't there, with B, I think it was. It really does conform to that in terms of this being a substantial building, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I know that, but it's quite an attractive building. I think it actually presents well with those porthole windows and the roof sort of access as well, the lights, the roof lights. And also, I thought it's been very sympathetically converted, that it's there anyway, and if it's not being used as a stables, the way that they converted it to a 3-bedroom sort of property has been done very sensitively, I think, and fits well into the context and the setting that it finds itself in. And I think also this point that with that glazed area, which is effectively where the roof overhang is, has created that sort of internal corridor, but stays within the footprint of the building is a critical point. What you don't want to see, and what this policy wouldn't allow, is sort of lots of add-ons and extensions, etc. Well, I'm not saying it wouldn't allow it, but it would have to be a different planning permission then. Whereas this one stays well within the footprint, I think, of this building, and I think is actually quite a tasteful addition to the countryside. So we do. Are there any other comments, questions, or points that anybody wants to make?
May I just come in briefly, Chairman? When I first looked at this, I had a slight concern that the bedrooms have these small porthole windows and ceiling lights. And I wondered whether that was sufficient, but I presume that's within building regulations and not specifically planning consideration, am I?
Yeah, building regulations covers particularly the amount of light into a room and also the means of escape in the event of fire. Yeah. The architect here will have designed it to satisfy the building regulations. I can't say that I've checked it with our building regulations colleagues, but what you do have is you're not relying on it's not like it's a first floor bedroom where if the stairs were on fire you'd have to jump out the window type situation, because clearly you can't get out of these windows, but you do have relatively straightforward access from the front of each bedroom and each room in the building to get out in terms of fire. The fire brigade would just smash the windows, wouldn't they, to get you out?
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of sort of sitting up in bed, reading and looking out at the nice countryside vista rather than that. But yeah, that's fine. So we're happy that if we're sitting there in the Red Room suite or the Shergar room, we're quite happy that we can get out in an emergency.
Yeah, he's enjoying himself now.
I'll rein myself in.
Okay, yes, okay. Well, there you are. Now I know what it's like on the other end, you see. So there we go. So we have a mover, yes. That was Councillor Griffiths, and Councillor Settle seconded it. All those in favour, please indicate. And that was unanimous, and we allowed Councillor Evans to vote on this occasion, so he's enjoyed that experience. Thank you for your attendance. Get over the disappointment of having to wait a little bit longer for the next meeting. I just want to mention one further thing, is that I've been able to have a few meetings with our new Chief Planning Officer, Paul McKinn. And I have to say, I think he will be an excellent leader and a really excellent addition to the planning team. I think it's timely as well that he comes with experience of critical national infrastructure projects that he's been involved in different parts of the country. And so therefore we look forward to his contribution. The reason I'm mentioning this is that he would have attended this particular meeting had he been able to, but he's at the wind farms exactly. I know I saw on the online thing, Councillor Gardner was there and two others, so very interesting listening to that. But that's where Paul is today, and you know, and we wish him all the best and welcome him remotely to Fylde, and hope he enjoys his time with us. So thank you. That's it.